So my question then is, if okay, let's say that post-colonial division is the cause of a lot of our problems and a lot of our instabilities in the Middle East. Therefore, how responsible are we as Arabs for not managing the problem or not managing the division accordingly and appropriately, and actually raising to the bait and falling into the bait of having conflicts with one another? Is there an element of responsibility there from our side?
Of course there is, but the question is this a new phenomenon, or is it a unique phenomenon for the Arab world? Because obviously, I mean, the answer to the question, militancy, extremism is not a uniquely Arab problem, is it? We know if, I mean, we only need to mention the French Revolution, the French Terror, the notorious terror of the French Revolution, to kind of illustrate the point that humans are susceptible especially when they are beguiled by romantic notions and ideals, to commit excesses. And I think in that way, there's a similarity that, much like the French revolutionaries who committed the terror, it's secular. That's the secular form, is what I'm saying. They excommunicated, quote unquote, right, everyone who was seen to be anti-revolutionary. Do you see what I'm saying? So in the same way, these extremists today will excommunicate, quote unquote, even though there isn't a centralized body, but they will excommunicate and execute anyone who's seen to be anti-Islamic, right? So what I'm saying is that these things are existent, and what it needs is the instrumentalization. There needs to be a trigger, is my point. So of course there is responsibility, but the trigger is what I'm interested in, because but for, again, if we ask like a legal question, but for the intervention, or but for the support for these groups in Afghanistan, for these groups do you see what I'm saying? Like, you see where I'm going with this? But for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, would bin Laden have gained the traction that he gained in the wider world? But for the support through the CIA and the Pakistani ISI and the Israel, right? That's the other part that's not really spoken about when it comes to Afghanistan, and the support of the West for the quote unquote mujahideen at that point, right? But for their support of those groups, would they have been able to have global reach like they have today? I don't know.
So can I just see if I understood your argument? So you're saying more interesting than the fact that there are extremist ideologies native to the region, but because there are indeed extremist ways of thinking present in any kind of region or wider group, what's more interesting than that is the way that foreign actors have exploited those extremisms for their own ends. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to an extent, yeah, definitely. The way in which the undercurrent has been brought to the fore and enabled. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about an enabling that's happening. And there's no way we can get around that. And I think to bring it to the contemporary, I mean, not to go too far away from Syria, but a contemporary example is in how Lieutenant General Michael Flynn was grumbling about the Obama policy to support jihadists. That's the long and short of it in the region. And it basically enabled, either through commission or omission, right, the IS, the Islamic State, to rise in Iraq and straddling, of course, Syria, and engage in those two crucibles. Now, what I'm saying is that there's an active peeling the veneer, peeling the kind of, the veneer. The question is, it's a policy decision that Obama made. And that policy decision, of course, General Flynn's been exonerated. There's been a lot of mudslinging on his name. If you kind of take the time to look behind the reasons why he was vindicated, you'll see that he was grumbling against the Obama administration's policy decision at the time when IS was rising. Now, my point is that policy decision was somewhat beneficial to the wider policy, the policy decisions to destabilize Syria, to Assad must go, right? Get Assad out, right? Because he was obviously one of the last remaining people who did not fall in line with the NATO plans for the region. And so again, we're seeing the use of non-state actors to destabilize the state, right? And it kind of feeds into the benefit of Israel, NATO, and of course the major players in NATO, the US and UK.
Do you think?
That's what the France. There's the
I
French.
wonder, does anyone have an answer to Oz's question, which I think was your implied question, Oz? That is there more though that the Arab states or major Arab entities, if you like, in the region, that is there more that they could have done to have resisted this these foreign interests, but in a kind of sustainable way, and in a sustainable way and an effective way, and in a way that also respected maybe and this is one of the ways that it would be sustainable, I would argue as well, of course, is that by allowing a greater amount of democracy at home. And I think I just want to reply to that little comment you made earlier, Zoe, which I thought was interesting, that you said that when people are seduced by these romantic ideals, I would argue that the people who commit these excesses to account are often those who also cling to some quite romantic ideals. So I don't think idealism is necessarily itself the problem. It's when people have the wrong ideals or the wrong interests, when they're looking out for their self-interest rather than the benefit of their community, their culture, their country, whatever. Yeah.
Well, I guess the reason I mentioned the issue about if we are responsible in some way. So from what Ziriad is suggesting, it's that what we're going through is not unique. All civilizations go through different moments of peace and different moments of turbulence. The Europeans have gone through what we're going through right now, right? But the question then is, if a civilization has gone through this instability in the past, now we have the benefit of history to learn what they did wrong and what they did right, and to apply that knowledge. Why aren't we doing that? Do you see what I'm saying? Because it seems to me like our own exceptionalism as Arabs shoots us in the foot. We think we're politically, religiously, ideologically, all these things unique, but really we're not. We're not. A lot of these dynamics are just repeat dynamics, and they're just mechanisms of, that's how political science works, you know? It's just a mechanism.
So how would you answer your own question then, Oz? Like, why do you think there is that susceptibility, or why do you think that these things occur today in 2020?
I think I agree with you that one of the main reasons why instability has occurred is because of division. But I think there's another layer as well, which is it's because of unsettled disputes. I think there were a lot of disputes that were ignited during the colonial period that were ignored or unresolved, consciously or otherwise, when the colonizers decolonized the region. For example, the Western Sahara issue between Morocco and Algeria, the Kurdish question.
Or the Alawites in Syria, see how they were the favored of the French.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But maybe that's the bit that is unique, that we can't learn the lessons from history, because obviously Europeans didn't go through this. It's not like Genghis Khan left an unresolved issue, a major unresolved issue in Russia or something that we can refer to and work around. So yeah, maybe it's the role of colonialism that is the new thing, and we're the guinea pigs in this situation.
I think the problem with Europe, the benefit that Europe had when it was going through these turbulent times and these revolutions, was that it didn't have, because you're right, every society has some kind of unresolved issue, like it has pre-existing sectarianisms or prejudices that serve to destabilize the society in some way, perhaps. But we had the benefit, you could argue, of not having foreign empires or powers that were significantly stronger than us and could use European instability to their, these pre-existing instability and kind of instabilities, and apply an order of magnitude onto them in terms of making them so much harder for the people actually living there to handle and to process these issues, because there are people who are taking these problems abroad and exploiting them for their own ends, right? because at least while Europe was going through these problems, you could say it was the most powerful, it was the great power of the world at the time. While the Arab world is very rich in natural resources and various other things, that I think it's just, unfortunately, the worst side of human nature, that if you see someone's fighting, if you see your neighbor squabbling in his garden and you see him drop, I'm going to use a very crude analogy here, but if people are fighting over their land and you see things get dropped on the side, you'll pick them up. Like people, they'll take advantage of instability to carve out their own little piece. And that itself can cause a lot more instability and then cause them to get even wealthier. And I don't think they have the NATO powers, Israel, these countries have an interest in West Asian stability. They have a very clear interest in its instability.
Exactly, I agree. And I think another issue that we have is there's a fear of expert and expertise. So I wouldn't describe myself as an expert, especially when I first came out of university. I was a complete novice at this. But one thing that I remember really clearly is when I graduated, I applied for like a foreign office role in Morocco, and they rejected me on the basis of having dual nationality. And they said that it's against procedure to have an individual with dual nationality because it presents a conflict of interest. Then I had a conversation with someone at the British Foreign Office, and they said to me that actually this dual nationality thing is not true. It's a load of rubbish. Like that isn't there. There's no legal grounding to reject someone on the basis of having a dual nationality. So the impression I got from that is that a lot of Arab governments don't like people that have studied outside, or they don't like subject matter experts, like to have a scientist in their nuclear team or to have an engineer in their infrastructure team or whatever, because it might expose some inefficiencies or corruption within their own government, right? So what I'm trying to say is domestic governments think that having experts in their government will undermine them. But in the case of Syria, maybe they needed more astute policymakers and academics. Maybe that would have protected Syria in the long term if they had a policy of embedding experts in their team 20 years ago under Hafiz al-Assad. Maybe that would have protected the country into the future from instability. Do you see what I'm saying? So yeah, I think this is an issue.
I get what you're saying. I think it's a very important point that you made about the grievances that are not addressed and are their baggage from the colonial era. That's a very important thread, and I think that is weaponized. It's been weaponized, and unfortunately, what the reality is that we are living in the media age, and so these issues are amplified somewhat. Now, when you look at the state formation project in Europe, when you're looking at the Romantic era, when you're looking at the late 1800s, and you're looking at the formation of these nation states, as we know them today, there was a lot of blood and carnage that was associated with it. A lot of people were killed, a lot of people were marginalized, a lot of people were slain for the flag and for the good of the nation. So I think what I'm saying is that it's just a question of focus. Today, this is in the news. It's in the news cycle 24/7, and that amplifies these issues like of these underlying issues, right? And what my point is that the formation of a state is never an easy process, and so the kind of the criticisms, and I think this is perhaps where we might want to go in that conversation. The criticisms that's leveled against the Syrian government for its approach against the revolution is kind of, it's almost schizophrenic. Like when I speak to people who are anti-Assad and are very much like criticizing Assad, and their point is that they'll use the examples of barrel bombs and chemical attacks and so on and so forth. But then my issue is and then in the same breath, praise the fact that they're living in a Western liberal democracy, which I find to be somewhat schizophrenic. And I'll explain why. What I mean by that is, look, violence and the state are in a marriage. and they're not going to be divorced anytime soon. The use of violence by state structures or state actors is an age-old tale from the beginning, from the Treaty of Westphalia. In fact, that's why the Westphalia kind of even occurred, was to kind of prevent the long wars that were occurring, between these princely states. But my point is, not to go off on too much of a tangent, is the use of force by, say, the US or the UK is seen to be within the strictures of the international community. And of course, they try to get legitimacy through the international body, right? but what I'm saying is, and these people I speak to